I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. Well, today is Friday, February 16th, 2024. Fridays, we normally call this program the Healing Circle, and it's led typically by my colleague and partner, Dr. Bravada Garrett Akinsanya. She's not available this week. We're resetting the program for the 2024 season, so look for her back with her team in the next couple of weeks. In the meantime, we continue to try to create and bring what we call robust conversation. The conversation today is consistent with the theme, the idea of the healing circle. The healing circle seeks to create a place where we can discuss our challenges, our opportunities, our failures, and our victories. And the question, the nature, the notion of healing, how we show up as healers and how we show up as healed in the world today. Well, I'm pleased to have connected with a friend and a leader in Twin Cities, the Rev Dr. Francis Tabla, who is the leader, the elder, the pastor of Ebenezer Community Church out in Brooklyn Park. And today, February 16th, actually at 6 o'clock at the end of the day, a special program that we want to invite you to. And in fact, take notes over the course of the hour. And I want everybody listening to invite somebody, let somebody know that this important discussion is going on tonight at Ebenezer Community Church. The program is called Black Suffering, Silent Pain, Hidden Hope, and in Our Words. And it's a Black history celebration, including discussion of a book, of a film, and musical. It's presenting the work of author Dr. James Harris. He's written a book called Black Suffering, Silent Pain, and Hope, and he's written the book called, I think it's In Our Words. I may be corrected in that momentarily, but also with him, his collaborator and son, Professor Cameron Harris, who's a filmmaker. His film called In Our Words, that's where the connection is. And I'm excited just to learn about their work, their stories, and how they are delivering information that helps us build as a community and as individuals, build towards being our best healed selves. Well, first, Dr. Tabla, let me welcome you, and I'll have you introduce Dr. Harris and Brother Cameron Harris and the program. And all of us, let's always make sure to keep mentioning tonight and keep inviting people tonight. It's at Ebenezer Community Church, 9200 West Broadway Avenue in Brooklyn Park. And for information, you can call 763-561-2100 tonight, February 16th, 6 p.m. at Ebenezer Community Church in Brooklyn Park. Well, let's go to Dr. Tabla. Dr. Tabla, how are you, sir?
I'm doing pretty good, Al, and thank you so much for having us on your program today. We are very, very excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here and excited to have this conversation. But before we get into our additional guests, let's talk about Ebenezer and talk about Dr. Francis Tabla. Introduce yourself and your great work and great vision here in Twin Cities. And actually, you are global in your reach and perspective. So talk about what you're doing and why you are doing what you do.
All right. So I'm Francis Tabla, and I'm originally from Liberia. I came to the United States in 1997 to do graduate studies at the School of Theology at Virginia Union University. And because of the civil war in my country, we couldn't return, and we began to ask God what to do. And he led us to plant a church that would reach out to Liberian immigrants in the United States. And so we surveyed about 7 states, and Minnesota stood up on the top in terms of the possibility of a church plant. And so my family moved into the Twin Cities in June of 2000, got a Bible study started with about 8 people in September of 2000, started worshiping in December of 2000, and the rest is history. We are now over 800 members, and we have, by the grace of God, built a sanctuary that is about 33,000 square feet, over $10 million US here in Minnesota. Our congregation is predominantly African immigrants. We have about 12 nations represented in the church. And we, over the past couple of years, have started to celebrate Black History Month because we believe that as immigrants, we must understand the struggle of the Black race here in the United States to be able to appreciate how far we have come, and especially for our children, to understand what this is all about. And so over the past years, we have been celebrating Black History Month, and I believe God is helping us to get that into our community. And just being on your platform today is an indication that we are making progress.
Well, would you please introduce our guest?
All right, so our guest today are the Reverend Dr. James Henry Harris. Dr. Harris is my professor of preaching from the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology, and he's also the pastor of Second Baptist Church right there on Otterwood in Richmond, Virginia. I have been, one of the blessings of my life is to have been a student of Dr. Harris, and we have kept our relationship over the years. He was very instrumental in me acquiring my doctorate degree here in Minnesota, very instrumental in giving me platforms to share there at Second Baptist Church, introducing me to some scholars around the country. And we are so privileged to have had him here a couple of times. And this one is special because he's now with his son, Cameron, who, as you already know, is a professor in film. And they are teaming up this time to help us celebrate Black history here at Ebenezer Community Church, not just for our church, but the entire community.
Let me ask Cameron Harris, first of all, before I go to Dr. James Harris, to talk about the run of the show tonight. What will people experience tonight? And why is this, what you're doing, so important? It's very important to explain the value proposition.
I think it's, so first and foremost, thank you for having us on your show today, Al. And what audience members and viewers can expect today, they can expect a learning experience, but also a joyous celebration at the church. And also thank Dr. Tabla for having us. And one of the things about teaching that I've noticed is I've had a lot of bad teachers in my life, and I strive to not be that. And, my father's been an excellent example of what a good teacher can be. And so with creating stories and an environment, we want to celebrate Black history at this church. And we want this event to be something that causes our viewers and audience members to think and go out in the community and figure out how they can be of service to their brothers, whether it's Africans in the diaspora or African Americans. So this event is a celebration of Black history. And also it's a celebration of education and the possibility that moving into the future, things will be better.
Dr. Harris, so glad to have you here. The title, Black Suffering, Silent Pain, Hidden Hope. What's there? What are we talking about?
Oh, wow. Thank you, Al. Appreciate it. And thank you.
And Dr. Harris, if you feel like preaching, you're welcome to. Whatever the Spirit leads you to do, that's what we're going to do.
That's so kind of you. That's so kind of you. I'm honored to be a part of this with my son Cameron, and also with Francis, and certainly with you, and your kindness and generosity in having us on today. I want to point out that Black suffering has been, as a book, it's been a journey, and it's taken a while. I've done like preludes to various audiences around the country, including at the church and other places. I delivered a lecture in South Africa at the University of South Africa, probably in 2016, I believe, and I had submitted a proposal in Black theology to talk at the university about Black suffering. The proposal was accepted, and so the first time I talked about Black suffering was at Hampton University, where I had delivered a lecture, and also at the University of South Africa, where I continued that lecture series and discussion. And I remember particularly upon arriving the first day in Johannesburg, we had gone, my wife and I had gone to visit Soweto and to see where Nelson Mandela had begun his practice of law and so forth, and where he was in the early stages of his life and so forth. So there was it was an afternoon of celebration. A young kid was out there uh, in the in the yard or in the street, and he asked if he could sing a song for me. He recognized initially that we were probably not from Soweto, and so he suggested that he sing a song and did a little dance. And then after he did that, he said to me, "You don't have to be afraid of us here."
Hmm.
And I was almost in tears because this was a kid about 8 years old
Mhm.
who recognized in my face an element of fear that he wanted to comfort me in connection with. So this child said to me, "You do not have to be afraid of us here," a kind of fear that I think is ingrained in the consciousness of African Americans
Yeah.
in living on this continent and in this nation. Because the truth of the matter is, as you and everybody on knows, the fact is that you can walk out of your front door on any given day and be maimed, shot, or killed, even by the police, unnecessarily. We all know, that here in Minnesota, right around the corner from where we sit today, one of the most prominent murders in the world of George Floyd took place in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic's year, and it caused a lot of a lot of protest and other kinds of things. But the bottom line is, we have protested before,
Mhm.
and we continue to protest. And in spite of the protest, I haven't done the complete statistics, but I know that hundreds of black males and females, have been shot and killed by the police even after the conviction of those who perpetrated this high crime and misdemeanor here in Minnesota. So even though we have protested around the nation, the murders continue, the suffering continues, the pain continues. It's so ubiquitous that we take it as a part of the almost like the oxygen we breathe.
Mhm.
We it's the ubiquity of it makes it non-extraordinary. Okay, and it makes it palatable to everybody in American society and around the world. The bottom line is that Black suffering has always benefited white people in America. Okay, white people have benefited from the suffering of Blacks, starting with the slavocracy, starting with Blacks as chattel in the United States for 300 years or so, making money, Blacks working wageless and powerless, building this country on the backs and labors of Black slaves. So it has been a monetary enterprise for white America. The great planters of Virginia and Plantation South, Louisiana, South Carolina, North Carolina, and so forth, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, these planters became rich Americans off the backs of Black slaves. So the history continues in many, many ways. The suffering continues. The wages of Blacks continues to be less than they are for whites. And we go on and on and on and on. You know the story as well, and maybe even better than I do.
Well, let's dig into what you had in mind when you focused on silent pain. Talk about that more.
Yes. What I mean by it is that we have, as a people, been pained and still are in pain by so many things and by the systematic nature of suffering and Black suffering that takes place. And we have been pretty much silent about it. And I think that silence also has grown out of slavery when it was criminal, to speak up or to protest or to say anything against the pain that the slave master perpetrated against the Black body. So I think in many ways we have learned to live with the pain, even though the pain has had its negative effects on all of us. Black people suffer from almost every physical ailment to a greater degree than their white counterparts. I think that's an internalization of the pain, the silence of the pain that we live with from day to day. But the pain has not killed us, and we still have hope because we are hopeful, we are hopeful people. I'll give you one quick example, and that is, in Black churches throughout America, we celebrate what we call watch night services. That's every New Year's Eve. These services are not celebrated in white churches. It's a Black church phenomenon. And the watch night service started because the Black slaves were watching for the next day, the New Year's Day. They would stay up at night, almost all night, praying that the next day would bring freedom. And so they were praying and bringing in the new day, the new year, as a freedom day and a freedom year. And I think in many ways, that's where the hope lies. Even though, we understand that there are times and incidents where we have to do more than hope. But I think without hope, we probably could not even survive at all.
Let's show the books you've written. Have you talked even more about them, Dr. James Harris? Black Suffering, Silent Pain, Hidden Hope. And as you say, it's a collection of essays, I think, over a period of time. And you describe our condition as one of being hopeful by nature. Hope to what end? What do you and how do you describe the character of hope for our people? And what's the relationship between our hope and hope for humanity as you see it?
Yes, that is a marvelous, wonderful question. I think that all of humanity can learn from Black people and what Black people have brought not only to America but to the world. In the face of all kinds of indignity, all kinds of distress, all kinds of pain, and all kinds of suffering, Black people have still been able to not only survive but to thrive. I think the Black church is a perfect example of that. Even though the church has been under siege by both internally and externally, almost from the very beginning, but the Black church continues to be an institution where Blacks come to get rejuvenated, to find new ideas, new hope in a very real sense. And one of the things that I teach my students as it relates to the sermon and other kinds of things is that the sermon itself should give folk hope when they come to church on Sunday. People come to church because they are in pain, because they are suffering, because in many ways they feel hopeless. And I think when folk leave the worship service in the sanctuary on Sunday, they should have a new understanding of life and recognize the new possibilities. And the sermon should, in that sense, create a new world for folk, a world that is grounded in hope and a world that's grounded in action as well. I recognize that some of my colleagues and others will say, well, hope is not a strategy. But in many ways, hope is a strategy, because as a strategy, hope, I think, has continued to propel us at least, to the place where we can survive all of the things that are thrown against us on a daily basis. So, yes, Black suffering grows out of that. The book that's on the screen now, In My Encounter with Racism and the Forbidden Word, again, is my experience of being in a seminar on the writings of Mark Twain, particularly The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, where Mark Twain uses the N-word 222 times on every page in that novel. That was something I didn't know as a 47-year-old. I had never read, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn before. When I read the book in the presence of whites, I was the only Black in the classroom pursuing the degree in in English literature, and that book was really an experience for me because I had been called the N-word before as a child, but to see it in writing every day for a 12-week seminar was a different kind of experience.
How did it make you feel?
Well, in many ways, the anger and all kinds of other things that accompany, the use of the word, it wasn't new for me because I was not a child. I was an adult. I was a professor at the time, and so I realized that, again, the ubiquitous nature in which Mark Twain used the word, I argue, is also a reflection of the racism, not only of Twain, but of America as well. And the reason why I claim in that book, and I've claimed on other platforms, the reason why Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, is one of America's classic pieces, is because of its use of the N-word over and over again. So, it's the complexity of American history. Continuation. These are issues that America has failed to deal with, for the past 300 plus years, like America has failed to deal with the issue of slavery. The Confederacy lost, but there are more schools in Virginia named after Confederate soldiers and Confederate leaders than there are those who fought for the Union. And so, this kind of history is instantiated in the consciousness of whites, but also as well as blacks.
I asked you how it made you feel because I read the book in the 10th grade in Kansas City, and like you, I was the only black student in a white high school in Missouri, in Kansas City, and I remember the heat I felt in my body as the book was being read and discussed, and as the word was said again and again, and that heat I felt earlier, maybe when I was 12 years old, when my great grandmother's sister, who was dying but living with us, had called me into her room and said, Alvin, she was going to instruct me on how to stay alive, right? I'm 12, I'm a young black boy. When you see white people always say yes'm and no'm, yes, no, sir, and don't look them in the eye. And I just remember listening in a way that was dutiful and respectful, but my body was on fire. I was angry and I was ashamed that instruction was taking place and that she felt the need out of her love for me to offer me that instruction, that direction. She was telling me how to stay alive at that time. And so that was the point of that question to you, Dr. Harris, how
Great.
you felt, what was in your body. And it ties into everything we talked about, is the damage that our experience and that suffering has inflicted in us, and the trauma that is generational, that doesn't go away. Talk about that, if you would, more.
Yeah, well, yes. The only thing I want to say was that, in the room that we were having the seminar, as pages from the book were being read, because one of the assignments was, well, we were on a system where everybody had to read and report on the book periodically. And, I certainly could think about, as the book was being read and discussed, images in my own mind and my own consciousness were always coming back as to what was taking place, even in the old antebellum house that the course was being taught in. Okay. So it was in that was a part of the way I felt as well. And the professor of the class, a tall, lanky white man, had the audacity to have each student to learn and recite 250 words from the book itself. And on that part of the assignment, I refused I refused to recite from Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and instead I recited from Count Cullen's Incident. Once riding in old Baltimore, heartfelt, head filled with glee, I saw a Baltimorean kept looking at me, and so forth. And I also recited from Langston Hughes' Refugee in America, instead of reciting from Mark Twain's book. So I think that was my example of protest. And I think that showed forth the deep anger that I felt in reading the book. But I also felt that that was an experience that I had not had. So I commend people like you, Al, who read that book at 12 years old. I mean, I really, I don't even know how I could have handled the book at 12 years old.
Actually, 14, 10th grade, maybe
Yeah,
15 years old.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's extraordinary. And then the book, and then it was taught. I assume that it's in many schools, it was only taught to the AP classes. It was not taught to everybody. It was only taught to those that they deemed to be, in the higher level classes. And oftentimes it was taught by white teachers as well, whose understanding of the book probably was limited at most.
Brother James, talk about your work as a filmmaker and how this all ties together. What thoughts are you having as this discussion is unfolding?
Yeah, that's Cameron.
Brother Cameron, sorry. Thank you. Yeah.
I think, when you interview people, well, as you know, as a journalist, when you interview people, they can recall traumatic events as if it happened yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, what's interesting is interviewing the elders who lived through civil rights and who lived through segregation, who lived through integration of the army and all of these things, white only bathrooms. They can recall the memory of being forced out, not allowed to sit down, denied a promotion from 60 years ago, as if it had happened yesterday. And, I asked someone in the film, my father had his experience in the classroom at Virginia Commonwealth University, and he's collected all these stories of Black suffering. And I asked a retired lieutenant colonel, why, in his opinion, did a lot of white Americans and a lot of white people hate Black people so much? And his response to me at 89 years old, he says, I don't know. And I often ask myself that question. And so what I've learned as a filmmaker, and I learned about this generation of young people and even older people, our attention spans are decreasing. And media is how you change the narrative. What we consume. And so hope comes from the media, if we allow it. But most media is negative, and it keeps the attention and it monetizes our attention. And so I wanted to make that nexus between both books and to have the film be work in tandem with the books.
Talk about the film more.
So I was a graduate student at New York University, and my father had his experience at Virginia Commonwealth University at 47. I had a similar experience at NYU at 27. I think at the time I was 27, where my professor, I was filming this chicken shop worker. This woman speaks 3 languages. She speaks Malay, Chinese, and English. And she would wake up at 4 a.m. and she would go to the restaurant and clean and wash the chicken and cook and make chicken and rice. So my documentary in my first year class was centered around, we have to make observational documentaries. So I observed this Malaysian Chinese chicken worker. And once I did all the filming, we go into post-production. And at this time, your professor helps you to edit and construct the story. And he turns to me and he asks, is this a house nigger or a field nigger? And so I don't have the disposition, of anger lives within me. And so But when you act recklessly, I would not graduate. So I have the forethought to, just walked out of the room and then wrote a letter to the dean and the president and all of those things. Look, the lights are coming on. It must be, I must be making a good point. And
God is listening to you.
And so I put a pin in that. And so I just moved forward. And as a part of my thesis, I was curious. I was like, well, I wonder what other Black people are experiencing. And then it was, I wonder what other Africans in the diaspora are experiencing. And then it was, I wonder what Africans who immigrate all over the world, like, what is their experience? Is there a through line? And one of the commonalities is, if you're in a country where everyone looks like you don't realize, Blackness has a separate meaning. Mm-hmm. It is only when Blackness is surrounded by other and is not the dominant culture that it has a negative connotation. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of Africans in the diaspora have stated that they were not aware of their Blackness until they had moved out of Africa or out of whatever country they were in and immigrated to another country and reminded. And so the film talks about and addresses all of these issues across generations, across continents, and across cultures. And the through line is that we are experiencing, we have a lot of similarities, and our similarities are not being discussed amongst each other. And so the goal is to have unity. If someone speaks another language or they wear other clothes, we as Black folks can be not friendly. I think we need to talk about that to one another. Mm-hmm. And so the goal is to just be friendly to anyone. It doesn't cost you anything to be kind. And so it highlights some of those things in the films, but it also highlights the importance of travel, the importance of communication, and the importance of learning and not just accepting what has been given to you. You have to do your own investigation. So I kind of set out, you don't hear my voice in the film at all. I'm not there to be highlighted. I'm there to highlight the experience of those who have allowed me to interview them. And I was also very cognizant of the fact that, these are real people. They're not actors. Mm-hmm. They have real jobs. Mm-hmm. Human resources, that's a real thing in corporations. So you won't see names attached to the bottom because I understand that, there will be retribution and retaliation if you tell the truth. And so as a culture and a society, we always talk about telling the truth, always tell the truth, tell the truth, tell the truth. And the reality is when you tell the truth, you're normally punished. Mm-hmm. And so I did not want anyone that was interviewed to be punished for telling their truth and their lived experience. I wanted to highlight them. And so that's what I set out to do. And in my opinion, I think that's what the film does.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is the Conversation with Al McFarlane. What a wonderful program. We're going to continue. Dr. Tabla, I want you to come in and talk about your experience and the discussion so far. I've got a bunch of questions. I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation. We'll be back in just a moment. Are you or someone you know recovering financially from the COVID-19 pandemic, the lockdown, or any other reason? If so, help is available. Findhelp.org is a site to find a wide range of resources, including food, medical care, and more. The best part is based on your zip code. Visit findhelp.org, enter your zip code and the service you need. You'll get a map directing you to the organizations that can help you. Help is waiting at findhelp.org. If you need help starting anew, findhelp.org is the site for you. I'm Al McFarlane. This is the Conversation with Al McFarlane, reminding you that tonight at Ebenezer Community Church, 9200 West Broadway in Brooklyn Park, Black Suffering, Silent Pain, Hidden Hope, and In Our Words, a presentation, a Black History celebration, including discussion of book, film, and musical. It's tonight, February 16th at 6 p.m. at Ebenezer Community Church, 9200 West Broadway Avenue, Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. For information, 763-561-2100. You don't want to miss it. And what I'm asking you to do is call somebody up and say, let's go together and engage to connect. We'll be hearing a wonderful, powerful presentation being presented by Dr. Francis Tabla with his guest, Dr. James Harris, the author of Black Suffering, Silent Pain, Hidden Hope, and his guest, Cameron Harris, filmmaker, producer of the film, creator of the film, In Our Words. We're talking about that right now. Dr. Tabla, again, thank you so much for arranging this interview. It's a great conversation. Talk about your experience as an immigrant. That's been brought up by our guest, this whole question of moving. You know, Dr. Harris, I wanted to cry when because I felt I was with you in South Africa when an 8-year-old child said to you, you don't have to be afraid here. That's a big thing. And it's deep that a child has both the perception, but also the authority to speak truthfully, recognizing your suffering, your pain, your apprehension, your fear, and telling an elder, a grown person, you don't need to be afraid. That's liberating, it's freeing. Dr. Tabla, talk about that and talk about your experience as an immigrant, being at home among people, our people, and then being here and creating community in a space, but also, as you said at the beginning, creating a bridge so that we connect. We're not separated, divided, because it's been the division that's created our I'll put in quotes, defeat. And I'm putting air quotes around that because I think that our defeat ultimately is going to be our victory, but we'll come back to that as well. Dr. Tabla, what do you think?
Yes, so definitely when Cameron mentioned about how Black people are not very conscious of their skin color until they are out of an environment where they are predominant, it's true. He posed that question to me, I believe, yesterday, as to when I came into this country, what was my greatest shock or my, greatest experience. And I mentioned, well, I'm from Liberia, and we are an African nation. We are all Blacks. So we were not cognizant of the color of our skin being an issue until we came to the United States. And then we began to experience this, prejudice, that we became more aware of the color of our skin. And as an immigrant, I have experienced racism at levels that are just incomprehensible, to the point that, I even published a book, Scrap Racism, but this is not about my book now. These are about the books of Dr. Harris. But in that book, I captured some of my experiences that I had here, with racism. And so one of the things I like about my publication is the fact that as an immigrant who came into the country, I can speak as an outsider that what my African-American brothers and sisters have been saying is true. And I remember on a given Sunday, I was, speaking about this book, and Attorney General Keith Ellison was worshiping with us. And as I talked about the book and talk about my own experiences as an immigrant with racism, after the service, he came to me and he said, Dr. Tabla, when you were talking, my eyes began to bawl. And he said, the reason is you are from outside of this country and you are validating or authenticating our claims that racism is real in this country. Mm-hmm. All right. So I experienced racism as an individual, as an immigrant church. We had our own share of, racial prejudice, trying to acquire loan to build. I mean, we had our share. Mm-hmm. All right. And we purchased our land 2004. It took us 11 years before we could finally get a breakthrough to get loan. And some of the excuses that the banking institutions were giving were all related to racial prejudice. Mm-hmm. So definitely we have had our share. And again, I'm extremely excited about this possibility because we want our younger generation, all of us, I'm still learning. I want to know about the struggles of Black people in this country, to develop a better and greater appreciation of where we are now and where we can potentially go as we are empowered.
Dr. James and Brother Cameron, a story. One of my reporters had gone to, I think, Ghana to live for a while. And when she came back, this was some years ago, came back, she dropped in at the office and I said, hello to her. Her name was Azania. Hello. And so she said, hello, African. And I'd never been called that before at that time. I said, what you call me? The defensive recoil. What you call me? She said, hello, African. And I thought about it. And this reminds me of the 8-year-old Dr. Harris. Said, what'd you say? I asked her again. And she said, hello, African. And there was something healing in the voice, healing in the word, something completing and fulfilling, something awakening in being acknowledged and called an African as an affirmation and as a positive cultural attribute, as a legacy of an invitation. And so the healing was in the voice, the word, the power, and the intent around it and with it. Doctor, as you were speaking, I was reminded about our legacy and continuity, I guess that's the right word. Right over my shoulder here, you can't see it, but there's the largest square picture up there is my family growing up in Kansas City. In that picture, I'm on the bottom row, bunch of kids on the floor. I'm 4 years old. But on the divan, seated, my mom, her mom, we called her Big Mama. They're from Mississippi, from Sunflower area in Mississippi. And her mom's mom, who was Lizzie, I didn't realize it at the time, but some years later, just a few years ago, when I went to see the movie 12 Years a Slave, I came home and for some reason, either the light was right, time was right, but the picture was glowing. And I got up and grabbed it like your lights just went off and on over there. Brother Cameron, this picture was glowing for some reason. And I picked it up and held it and looked at it and thought about it and did the math. Lizzie was born the property of other human beings. I knew someone personally who, when she came into the world, was the property of another human being. And it brings me to understanding that we have not come far from the trauma, the oppression, the criminal enterprise of slavery that is called the United States. That's what it was. It was a criminal enterprise. And that's what it remains in many ways because it operates on the return on those investments. And we were the product as enslaved human beings. Throwing that out there, Dr. Harris, for you to respond and for you to respond, James. And I'm particularly interested in your experiences as you travel the world. You mentioned South Africa. James, you said you've been working around the planet. I want to know about what you're discovering as you interact with our people and people around the planet. Dr. Harris.
Yes, actually, my son Cameron is the one who has traveled the planet. I was in South Africa, but Cameron is much more of a world traveler than I am. He could speak to that. I'll say something briefly about that. As you said, that the experience of the young Black boy was, to use your language, really was healing, but it was also eye-opening, as well. And it said to me that, the furrows on my brow or the etches in my face display the suffering and the pain of experiencing racism, particularly American racism, over the number of years that I had and whatever age I was at the time, probably about nearly 60 years old at the time. But as you said, I was, I really, when the child said what he said, I could not stop crying. I really could not stop crying. And even today, when I recollect that incident and that experience, I still often well up with tears because of the insight of the child and the child's ability to really get to the core of what I was researching, what I was all about, and that is Black suffering and also silent pain and the hidden hope. I think the silence of the pain that we feel as Black people after being exposed to suffering and slavery and so forth, almost at every level for so long, is almost inexplicable.
Mm.
And the only way it can be often expressed is through the silent tears um, that we all experience from day to day. Now, you mentioned when you mentioned Sunflower County in Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm not a Mississippian, but I recognize the name of that county because it is the same area where Emmett Till was murdered.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so it rang a bell. It was also in Mississippi where Stokely Carmichael first used the term Black Power in 1966 as well. Mississippi has given us, you know, just such extraordinary experiences, not only in suffering, but also in struggle, but also in strength and also in hope. And you know, so I'm inspired often by the stories that my son Cameron tells more fully, and he is the one who has talked to our people on every continent in the world about what it means to be Black.
Cameron, go ahead.
I think that you know most people are outside of conflict zones, or just even in conflict zones, are friendly. There's a friendly person, and like you will find whatever you're looking for, and so I try not to look for trouble, and I'm a glass half full kind of guy. You know, if there's a tragedy, I say, all right, where's the possibility? Because there are too many negative people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I also attribute that to what God has spared me from. And so I can only think that I have been placed here for a reason, to do something positive. When those, you know, and when people I have seen, I can just think to myself, there for the grace of God go I.
Mm-hmm.
Why have I been spared? And so I have been spared to give the message that people are really just kind. And I have been shown kindness from strangers. A lot of the people in this film, I never met them before. Before we sat down for the interview, as we have sat down today, I only had one conversation with them via email, or I met some people on the street, and then I showed up at their house, and then they brought their friends. And so I just got back from New Zealand and Australia, and I met with a lot of Aboriginals there, and you know, they welcomed me. I mean, a Maori man who I had just met walking down the street. You know, you see somebody walking down the street and they give you the head nod. Okay,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
So he gives me the head nod. He said, "What you doing here?" And we chatting, and he takes me to his gym, and he takes me to his home. I meet his wife and his kids, and you know that. And people will say, "Well, you know when you know," and as a whole, like, our people are very friendly and welcoming. And most people, you can tell when you see someone, also when you spend a lot of time moving in the world by yourself, you can tell when people mean you harm.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have been spared for whatever reason, and I'm always reminded that God is doing for me what I could not do for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to guard and protect my gratitude and share that with everyone, that the possibilities and the gifts of God freely I have been given. So I need to be of service to my people wherever they are.
Let's look at a trailer for your project, your film. Cooper, go ahead.
violence seems to stem from my wanting to exist, or my wanting to stick around, right, at any cost. So white people, when they came to America, that's what they did. Through violence, they have everything that they have. And now when black people show a little violence because they want to have something, it's a big to do. And I think that's ludicrous. You have killed, you have stolen, you have maimed, you've torn up families, you've done all kind of junk to people. And when you see black people doing it, we're called animals, or whatever the case may be. But that definition never applied to you when you came to this country and you did the same thing.
That's powerful. That's amazing. Wonderful. Beautiful. Great stories. So my wife, brothers, is from Crystal Springs, Mississippi, near Jackson. And I grew up in Kansas City, as I said earlier. And when we married, we'd go down there, visit her family regularly. Crystal Springs, small town of 5,000 people. Went down there and was sitting on her sister's porch across the street in this cul-de-sac is a chicken shack where chickens lay eggs, and the kind of place where one day we're sitting there and commotion in the shack. I think, what was it? Some kind of animal, a snake had gotten into the chicken coop. So one of the cousins who lived next door, 2 doors up, came out with a shotgun, boom, shot the snake, walked out, and the day went on. It's kind of place where you sit that happens in the course of breathing over the course of a day. And while you're sitting there, people drive by and you wave at everybody. And as I sat there, I told my wife, this reminds me of my father's home. We have a country peasant farm in the Blue Mountains in Jamaica. My father, Jamaican, though he was born in Cuba, but his family Jamaican. And I said that sitting here in Crystal Springs, I see all of the characters that I have seen in Jamaica. And I actually see the same characters, the same roles being played out that I grew up with in Kansas City. And then when I went to Ghana and went to Uganda, same story. Our people are the same. And you're going to have, the humble, the righteous, the foolish, the foolhardy, the daring, the pensive, the studious. All of those characters fulfill every drama in every community. That's been my observation. And that when she went to Jamaica, she said, yep, Dresiki, a place called Mile Gully, just like Crystal Springs. And what's been your experience? I think you both kind of alluded to this, how we are. You did certainly, Brother Cameron, about finding our people wanting to be kind and peaceful everywhere. Talk about your discovery of how we show up for each other around the planet.
I think when there's a call to action, there's a kind of a wavelength that people function on as you move around, and there's that positive energy that you can tap into. And when there's a call to action, people want to say all the time that that Black people don't support one another. We don't support small business. And I am sitting here right now as support of Dr. Tabla, who I haven't seen in 27 years, 26, 27 years, give or take. And so I want to smash that narrative because it's not true, but it's not being disseminated to the masses. And so if we don't own our own media, because I own this film, I have the rights to screen it and show it wherever. Mm-hmm. And the ownership component, that's critical, because that's how we change the messaging and the narrative that we don't support one another. We're not kind to one another. We're all of these things. And if you turn on the television or the news, that's what you will see. Mm-hmm. My day-to-day interactions with Black people across the planet has not been what I have been shown, or not what I was told in school when I was, I can remember in school, there's a woman in a documentary where she talks about being going to the guidance counselor and telling the counselor that she wants to be a teacher or something. I'm paraphrasing right now, but the guidance counselor tells her that she's going to be a florist. And she says, no, I'm going to be this. And she says, no, you're going to be a florist. And so that ceiling that is placed upon us sometimes is not real. And Dr. Tabla talked about this too, the racism and the prejudice that he experienced. But when you come from, and if you know that you can fly, why would you ever fall? There are going to be obstacles. Life is not a yellow brick road. It has taken a long time to acquire the capital to make the church become a reality. But where does that drive, ambition, and that knowledge come from? It comes from centuries of history. It comes from seeing people achieve and attain the impossible. And so just because it's difficult, when I see that over and over and over and over again, that means in my mind, I can achieve anything. It may not be overnight as Instagram and TikTok is. It may not be in the next 24 hours. But if I continue to chart the course and I continue to do what I was designed for, then it will come to fruition.
I call that the ability to recognize the gift in each other. That if we lead both expecting and seeking and delivering our gift in each and every encounter, we invite the people that we encounter to respond at the level of their gift as well. And that gift is a sense of what is divine in us, that we have a responsibility to grow and return to the Creator. So listen, we're out of time. This hour has gone so quickly. I have enjoyed the conversation, and I want Dr. Tabla to take a minute to, again, invite everybody to this event this evening.
Yes, so certainly. This is part of our Black History Month celebration, and we are excited to have Dr. James Henry Harris and his son Cameron featuring at this event tonight. And because we want as many people as possible to show up, we have just made the donation $10 for adults and $5 for kids. So you can come. Please do not let the finances to make you stay home. Come and be a part of this great celebration. We're going to have the music ministry of Shiloh Temple from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And we're also going to have the music ministry from the Ebenezer Community Church, interwoven into the celebration. It's going to be a great time of fellowship, and we invite you to come.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so very much, Dr. Harris, Brother Cameron Harris, and Dr. Tabla. Thank you so much. There's the number, 763-561-2100. Call for information. Most importantly, show up. Gentlemen, I thank you so very, very much. God bless you. And I want to say that I think we're in this together. And what I also say is that victory is both imminent and inevitable. We simply have to keep breathing and keep walking. With that, I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you.
Thank you.